Okay, good morning. This is Professor Mayer, and what I'm doing is I'm going through the project that we have related to the accounts receivable. Now, originally we had set this up in IDEA. Given the fact that many students don't have access to this, what I decided to do was to reformat the same project but using Excel. Now, what I want you to do before we get started is two things. In the announcement, what you see are two files that you want to download, and you want to download these to a folder so we can have ready access to these. The first is the accounts receivable database, which is actually an Access database. The second is a customer list. Now, when we open up the customer list, one of the things that you're going to see is that it's actually in a print format. This is very usable if you're printing this up and showing it to people, but it's not in your typical database or Excel format. So this is one of the things that we'll need to do is to create this document and put it into an Excel file, which is going to be kind of interesting. I think you're going to learn some skills that are very valuable and are going to be very helpful to you. Now, what we're going to be open up an Excel file, make sure that it's a blank Excel file. And as you're setting this up, let's talk a little bit about the project. So this project essentially are two files related to accounts receivable. And these files are sent to you at the beginning of the audit. So at the beginning of the audit, you are in the risk assessment phase. So let's pretend that the files were given to you by your audit lead or the partner, and he or she said, here's some files related to accounts receivable for our client. Please take a look at these and identify risk areas that we need to look at. That's all the information that we have. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at these files and doing analysis. Some of the things that we're going to be looking at is we're going to be doing conditional formatting. We're going to be doing a sum if calculation. We're doing this wonderful thing called VLOOKUP tables as well as pivot table. We're going to create these files in Excel. So we're going to open these files up in Query and make some adjustments to these files. Now, you need to pay very close attention to what we're doing, and you need to be able to replicate this in your own projects. So the idea is that what you're going to be doing is you're going to be loading the projects up, loading the two files up, setting up the tables within Excel using the query function and the other components of Excel that we've already talked about. Within each table, provide a brief narrative, no more than a paragraph, 2 or 3 sentences, basically explaining what the issues are, and then save this file as your project, and this is a project that you're going to be uploading into the assignment Dropbox. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to create a query or open these files up in query mode so that we can actually work with these. So you notice that the ribbon at the top, one of the ribbon buttons says data. So when we click data and double click this and we see the ribbon, what we see here is that we're going to create a new query. So we click the new query and we say we're going to create this from a database because it is from an Access database, and then go to Access database here. We open this up, and then what we're going to see, if you have this set up to link to your folder where the other items are, is we see the database for the accounts receivable. So we just simply highlight this, import. Now, this is a pretty neat function, and it may be a function that you're not familiar with, but I guarantee you that as you start playing with this function, and I strongly encourage you to explore the functionality of the query tool is it will truly amaze you in terms of the things that you can do. It's actually pretty exciting. And when I was working on this project and deciding to put this into Excel, I was not aware of the many functions that you have within the query tool. So let's open the query tool. And given the fact that it's an access database, it's asking what table that we want. Well, since there's only one table, we load this up. And we click Edit, and the file is going to show up in just a minute. Okay, now one of the cool things related to query is that you're actually able to make changes, and if you go, whoops, I made a mistake, you can actually change the, you can go back and remove the functionality. Okay, so let me give you an example of this. Let's look at the table. What we see here is we have the account number, we have the invoice number, the type. We're not really interested in that. We have gross amount, and this is a Canadian company, so there are two separate taxes. This becomes interesting as part of our analysis. And then we have the paid flag and the date. Now, one of the things that I am not interested in is I'm not interested in the time. I only want the date. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to change this to just show the date. So we highlight this. We then click under Home. We go Date Type. We pull this down, and instead of having date and time, we simply are interested in the date. So we click the date, and you notice how this then is reformatted. Now, one of the things that I want to point out is that numbers and letters, such as the account, is going to show up as a text type. So if we look at the account number, and I want to just point this out, you notice that it's as a text, which is exactly what we want, because we want to be able to use the text in terms of creating VLOOKUP tables, pivot tables. We don't want this to be a number. Same thing with the invoice. So you notice that the invoice right now is set up as a text, which is exactly what we want this to do. Occasionally, when the file comes in, you may have numbers that are, in fact, you don't want them to be numbers. You want these to be text, because you want not to look at them from a sum perspective, but you want to look at these from the perspective of actually sorting data. So in this case, the account number, the invoice number are just fine. Gross amount is set up in a numeric and decimal point, which is just fine. The sales tax are just fine also. Now, let's talk a little bit about the file. So the file was created on April 1st, 2015. And what we're looking at is we're looking at everything through the end of April. So we want to understand the fact that when we received the file is that there actually were items that were paid. So you notice that the paid flag has a P. So if there is a P, that means that it was paid. Well, we don't want to include those in our database. Okay, so what we want to do is we pull down the drop down, and we simply just ignore the P. We hit OK. And now the paid flag, you notice it says null, basically ignore that, is essentially saying there's nothing in that cell. Now, the date, we want to include everything except for anything that took place on April 1st. So if we scroll down here, we see that there actually was some transactions that were on April 1st. So we want to remove those. We hit OK. Now, one of the cool things here is that the applied steps are on the right side of the page. And if in fact we want to delete anything that we did, say we did something wrong, we don't want to do it that way, we can simply just delete it. So as an example, let's say we took the invoice number and we said, okay, well, maybe we want that to be a number. Well, we can turn this into a whole number. And one point that I'll make for you is that when it's a number, it's justified to the right side. When it's a alphanumeric or a text, it's on the left side. Okay, so then we look at it, we say, well, we don't want this. We want to change this back to a text. Well, instead of going back over here, we can simply just click the X bar over here. So you notice we actually remove the text, which I think is actually a pretty cool function related to this. We have the accounts receivable file. We have done two things, actually three things. We changed the date to an actual date as opposed to date time. We removed the items that were paid. And again, the file was created on April 1st. In that interim time before they zeroed everything out at the end of the day, there were items that were paid on April 1st. Well, this is accounts receivable. We're not interested in anything that was paid. We're only interested in the items that were not paid. The other issue is the fact that there were transactions that showed up on this file from April 1st, and we simply removed those. So removing the paid date flag is we just do the drop-down menu. You notice that P is not checked. On the date is what we have over here is April 1st is not checked. We hit OK. Then what we're going to do is we're going to close and load. This will take just a minute here. And essentially what we have created is we have created a file that has everything that is not paid. We have the dates set up as the dates. And if we actually go to 2015, is that there are no dates for April. Okay, so we're good. This is very good. Let's leave this file here. We want to now take the other file. And the other file is related to the customer names. And the things that we want to pull out of that are going to be the account number, because we want to link the account number in that file to the account number in this file. We want to have the name of the account and then the credit limit. So let's go back into that file and find it. So we have data, and we're going to set up a new query. So again, we click data from the menu, we go to the ribbon, and we click new query. Now in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to go from the file, and this is actually a text file. So I have it linked up to the folder, and what we're going to do is we're going to click customer list. And then what's going to take place is that the customer list is going to show up like this. Okay, that looks pretty messy. I'm just going to bring this out again and look at this. What has taken place is that everything is in a single row. You notice also that we have everything lined up. As an example, the first account, Dan Aykroyd, we have the account number, we have the name, we have an address here. We're not really interested in the address, but what we are interested in is the credit limit. So this is a file that I really want you to play with, and there's actually a number of ways that we can get to where we want to be. And what I'm going to do is to show you what I think is probably the most efficient way, but as long as you get to the end point, it's going to be just fine. Let's go to transform, and the first thing that we want to do is we're going to split the column. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to split the column where we can get the account number to show up on the side. Very easily done. We want to split the column. You notice there's a couple of spaces before. We're not exactly sure. It looks like it's probably 2 spaces. Okay, so that's fine. And then what we have is there's a number of spaces before we get to the name. We're not interested in getting exact. So let's say we're going to split it so that we get the first 10 spaces. And that's probably going to be okay. We just don't know. But let's see what happens. So in transform is what we're going to do is we're going to split column. So we click split, and you notice it says by delimiter. Delimiter would be a comma or a space, something to this effect. But we decided we're going to split it based upon characters. So we said that we're going to split it based upon 10 characters. Where do we start this? Well, we're going to start this once at the far left side. If we repeat it, what it's going to do, it's going to split it every 10 spaces and make a separate row. We're not interested in that. We actually will have an example in a minute in terms of splitting right as far as possible. But at this point is all we want to do is we're going to get the account number and get it set up. So we hit, again, 10 spaces once as far left as possible and see what happens. Okay. So we have a new column, and it looks good. It looks messy, but it looks good in the sense that we have all the account numbers there. It did not infringe on the name or any of the other information, so I'm pretty happy with this. In the title, we're going to create a title. So double click that so it becomes dark blue. We're going to call this account number. Okay, so we've got the account number. Now, the first thing that we want to do is highlight the column, do a right click on your mouse, go to transform and trim. Now notice what happens when we do the trim. Essentially what the trim does is it takes the spaces off before the character and after the character. And this becomes very important as we are actually looking at this. So we have trimmed this. Now, before we go further, what we're interested in is we're interested in cleaning up all the stuff out there. So I'm going to show you two tools that actually work. And again, play with it, see what you're interested in doing. The first thing you want to do is we want to go to Home. What we want to do is we want to remove rows. So we click Remove Rows, and we want to remove a number of top rows. Well, now if you count this, you notice that our first account is going to be on row 11. So if we remove 10 rows, we can do it like that, and we say OK. Now that's one way to do it. That cleans up some of it, but we still need some more work to do. Let's say we don't want to do it that way. Let's say we want to do it a different way. So I'm going to go back here, and you notice in the applied stuff, removing the rows, I remove that, so it's back to where we are. One of the cool features of this function is if we open up the account number, let's see the things that we don't want. We don't want blank spaces. We don't want, well, let's talk about the account number in just a minute. And then these last two items where there are lines, we're going to remove those. What do we have now? So now what we have is we have the accounts, but we also have those headers. Okay, so we need to remove those headers, but let's take a look at this and make sure you understand what we've done. So you notice that every page is a page header. It says account number, name, address, credit limit. We want to remove that. Okay, that's exactly what we're trying to do. So going back into Excel in our customer list is if we go to the drop down where we're filtering, is we just click off the account. Take a look at this, and this looks good. To verify this is you should have 87 rows. And the validity of this is that there are actually 87 accounts in the account file. So we're good. So we have the account number. Again, what did we do? Make sure you do this is we want to trim, and we want to trim to get rid of the spaces. So we're good to go there. Let's go ahead and trim this information in the column 2 because it's going to be easier to work with. So again, we highlight it. We then go to transform and trim. So you notice what happened here is that the spaces got removed in front of the name, and you don't really see this, but spaces after the credit limit got removed also. Okay, now what we need to do is we want to split this out so that we get the names. And you can play with this. Again, it's easy to play with simply because you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. You simply just go over here and remove it. But what function are we going to use? We're going to split the column. And we're going to split this based upon number of characters. And again, what are we trying to do here is we're trying to separate the name. So we're going to as far left as possible, and the name is actually, I've played with this, and 20 seems to work out pretty well. Okay, so what happens with 20 is you get the complete name and you don't get any of the address. So what we want to do here is, again, we're going to double click the heading. We're going to call this customer name. Then it's always a good practice to trim it, because what that's going to do is that's going to remove the space on each side, so it's a nice clean file. The one last thing that we want to pick up is going to be the credit limit. So this looks pretty sloppy here. So you notice that we've got the name or the address. We're not interested in the address, and the credit limit, and it's pretty sloppy. Well, again, the first thing you want to do, and I always like to do this sort of as a good practice, is we want to trim this. We want to get rid of the extra spaces. Now, one of the really cool things related to this functionality is that when we split the column, is we can split this either to the right or to the left. So we're going to split this column. Again, make sure you have the right column highlighted. We're going to split this, and in this case we're going to do a delimiter, and the delimiter that we're going to use is going to be space. Now hold on, we're going to be space at the rightmost delimiter. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means that it's going from this side here, it's looking for the first space. And that's why we needed to trim this, because we don't want any of those spaces on this side. And the first space is going to be immediately before the number. Make sure this is rightmost delimiter, and we are delimiting based upon space. We click OK, and voila. We have nice clean numbers here, almost, but let's see what actually takes place when we go through this. Let's go ahead and remove this middle column. We're going to remove. So what we have is we have the account number, we have the customer name, and then we're going to call this credit limit. One of the things that you will notice when you go through this file is that there is somebody, James Bond, that it says hotel. Well, why is that? Well, let's go back to the file and see what took place. And it's an easy explanation. And in fact, what we're going to find is that it actually creates a risk. So we'll just go find and go, what was the name? Bond. And James Bond in the file. Well, James Bond is located at the Hilton Hotel in Quebec. Guess what? There is no credit limit there. So when we did the delimiter and went through the spacing, it was looking for the first space, and the first space was exactly after the hotel. Well, that's a risk area, but it also creates something that we want to talk about in the file. So because there is a letters in the credit limit column, it defaults to a text file. So you notice here that the type is text. So we want to change this to a whole number. We change this to the whole number. And then what takes place is, because hotel is not a number, it says error. Well, guess what? That's absolutely no problem. And when we close it and load it into Excel, that's going to clear itself out and it's going to be blank. Okay, so we actually have our first audit finding. Our first audit finding is that we have a client that has not been established with a credit limit. Why is that happening? Well, we don't know. We're in the risk assessment area, and that's the point related to this file. We don't know why things are happening. What we're trying to find out are the risk areas where there are, in fact, errors. So we want to close this and load it. And what we have is now in our Excel file. It's actually right next to the other file. So let's actually change this to accounts receivable. And we're going to change the other one to a customer list. So let's just clear things out here and make sure that we see what's taking place. There's 88 lines because the first line is the header, but there's 87 customers. And then let's look at James Bond. James Bond, as you notice that it said hotel, we converted that to a number. In the query it says editor, but when it transferred over, it only transferred the numbers. So James Bond is now a blank. In the next video, we're going to now use these files to do some pretty exciting work using the tools that we've talked about. Play with the data before you actually go into section 2, and make sure that what you see on your screen is replicating what I have in the video. And I think if you do it that way, you will be well served. So thank you very much. I'm excited about the next video, and we will talk to you then. Bye-bye.